I'm Kumar Ramakrishna, head of the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research, or ICPVTR in RSIS. Welcome to the fourth installment of the ICPVTR webinar series on the terrorism and extremism landscape in Southeast Asia. In the previous three webinars in this series, we looked at the terrorism and extremism landscape in Southeast Asia. We looked at the issue also of managing returning foreign fighters, as well as the situation in the southern Philippines 4 years after the Marawi fighting. So thank you for your feedback on those webinars, and we are pleased that you have found this series helpful. So this afternoon, in this fourth and final webinar of the Terrorism and Extremism Landscape series in Southeast Asia, we are very pleased and honored to have with us three distinguished and very knowledgeable speakers to share on the topic of countering online radicalization in Southeast Asia. So our three speakers are Pak Savic Ali, who's director of NU Online and Islami.co, Mr. Akil Yunus, who is assistant director of the Southeast Asian Regional Center for Counterterrorism, or CSAT, part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Malaysia, as well as Madam Amina Rasul-Bernardo, who is president of the Philippine Center for Islam and Democracy. These are three very distinguished speakers. We're very lucky to have them. Pak Savic Ali will assess the landscape of Indonesian radical Islamist websites and provide insights on how to counter these websites based on his experience in running the popular moderate Islamic websites NU Online and Islami.co. Mr. Akil Yunus will draw on the Malaysian experience to discuss the appeal of social media as a tool for radicalization and recruitment into terrorist groups, especially targeting the youth. He will highlight some of Malaysia's successes and challenges in countering online radicalization to date, while briefly touching upon the idea of digital resilience as the more permanent and effective solution against online radicalization threats. Finally, Madam Amina Rasul will offer us a Philippine perspective on this issue. She will share her views on how social media could create echo chambers that convince participants of one point of view without the benefit of debate or access to fact-based analysis. She will highlight how in the Philippines, social media and the internet are used in the radicalization of communities, whether it's for negative politicking or recruitment for armed conflict and violent extremism, and the problems faced by the Philippine government in countering this threat. So I'm quite excited to hear their views. Each speaker, to remind them, will have about 15 minutes each to make their key points. After they complete their presentations, we will have the moderated question and answer session. I'll moderate as usual. Please send in your questions using the chat box on the right. So with that, I'll pass the time over to our first speaker, Pak Savic Ali. Pak Savic, I think you can carry on.
Yeah, okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's not for me to join with this session. It's a good honor for me having this. The first, maybe I will introduce myself. I'm Savic Ali. I'm the director of NU Online, the official site of NU and Islami.co. This is actually the popular website for urban Muslim. But I'm also involved in the NU Media Network. This is like the network for NU in the website in our media network with maybe the dozen of websites, yeah, more than 14 websites, I think, in our network. So I will start my presentation with the fact that actually maybe from the Pew Research, the fact that most Indonesian people, they see that religion is very, very important. Maybe to the next slide, yeah. Most Indonesian people, I think, based on Pew Research, they see religion is very, very important. More than 93% of Indonesian people. This is the data from 2017, I think, and the last data on 2020, more than 69% Indonesian people, they see that religion is very, very important. So this is, I think, very historical because in Indonesia, maybe, yeah, most people, they feel maybe religious. Maybe Indonesia is one of the most religious people, one of the most religious country, because even in Muslim, even my friend, for example, yeah, maybe they do not regularly go to the mosque, but when discussed about religion, he is very, very passionate. So everything about religion in Indonesia becoming very, very sensitive and becoming very important. And they, unfortunately, I think in the next slide, the teaching, the interpretation of Islam as the most majority religion in Indonesia, more than 87% of Indonesian people are Muslim. And unfortunately, many young generation in Indonesia, Muslim generation, affected by radical ideologies. The survey that conducted by Alfara Research, more than 23% of students supported ISIS. The survey conducted in 2017. More than 23% students supported ISIS, and more than 23% of students also supporting Khilafah as a Daulah Islamiyah, as Islamic State. So this is the fact that may be quite worrying in Indonesia, and most of them affected by pengajian-pengajian offline, offline pengajian, and also online pengajian in the website, in YouTube, in social media, in WhatsApp group, in Facebook, also in Instagram. And so right now in the digital age, maybe the next slide, the social media becoming the new battlefield for ideology, for politics, maybe for economy also. I think after Reformation, there are much more organization in Indonesia, maybe the quite left-wing organization or moderate organization or right-wing organization. Also in the Muslim spectrum, moderate Islamic group or hardliners, liberal Islamic group. So after Reformation, there is much more organization, much more foundation, much more mosque, much more madrasah that actually affiliated to many ideologies, various Islamic school of thoughts. And because of the internet, the user of internet increasing every year, and right now more than 180 million Indonesian people using the internet, mostly still using Facebook, but YouTube is maybe the most visited the website in Indonesia. Right now, if you look at the Indonesian YouTube, you can find easily the pengajian from many ustadz, from example like Pak Pures Sihab, the moderate ustadz, or Gus Baha from the young ustadz from NU, or Ustadz Abdul Somad from Sumatra, or some of the ustadz that affiliated to Salafi ideology like Khalid Basalama. And there are some ustadz that they affiliated to the more radical ideology. But the internet becoming the new battlefield, online becoming new battlefield. In YouTube, in Facebook, in Twitter, in WhatsApp group, Instagram, or in Telegram. So that, and there is an interesting fact that I found, the next slide, that actually the Muslim reader, the religious people, they only read Islamic, the website. This is the picture that actually showing the overlapping of the reader of the website. In maybe in the left side, maybe from side of view, maybe in the left side. This is Islamic website like Quran, Muslim Moderate, Alif ID, Islami.co, and NU.ID, Al Manhaj, Rumaiso, Islam Post. This is more than 40 Islamic website, and most of the reader of the Islamic website, they do not read mainstream website, mainstream media in the right side. like kompas.com, tempo.co, okezone, suara.com, kumparan, Tirto, and everything. So with this picture, we can see that most Muslim, Indonesian Muslim, becoming maybe single-minded on view of everything when they see everything. So yeah, because they do not read outside their group. They only read their own source. For example, the Salafi, they only read the Salafi website. For example, the radical group that they read, for example, arrahmah.com or islampost.com, they only read their own website. They do not willing to read another website. So this is why this is like maybe in social media, this is like echo chamber effect. One part is because of algorithm, because of Facebook and Google algorithm, but one, because of they do not willing to read another site, another source outside them. And with this website, there are many websites that affiliated to Salafi and affiliated to, supported to ISIS or Al Qaeda. They regularly creating content to influence the young generation, to the young people, and they use many narrative, and not only one narrative or supporting Khilafah or supporting ISIS or supporting jihad. And on the next slide, we found that actually there is no single narrative on extremism. Maybe in some case they're using directly with maybe ISIS narrative, or are they using jihad to encouraging the Muslim to support ISIS, for example. And you know that hundreds of Indonesian people went to Syria. But in some cases, they're using the narrative that Islam under attack. So this is not, they don't need Quran, they don't need Hadith to encouraging people to support them. So they don't regularly, they don't usually use a Quran or Hadith to encouraging people to support their extremism narrative. But they're using Islam under attack, they're using Israel, they're using justice, they're using Westernization and many things, and also they're using Zionism. This is some of the narrative that we use to influence the people, especially I think young generation, because the most of internet user in Indonesia are young generation. And so what we are doing, the next slide, what we are doing actually, we want to tackle, we want to balancing, we want to countering their narrative, because with the increasing internet user in Indonesia, it's very dangerous if our people affected by their ideology, radical or extremist or violence ideology. So we want to tackle this narrative, and we want to tackle this website, this channel, and there's a platform. So what we do is actually is creating more content. There is two goals. The one is to countering their narrative, and the two is actually to protecting our people, to maintaining tolerance, moderate perspective in our religion. So this is maybe to countering their narrative. We use Hadith, we use Quran, but to maintenance our moderate perspective, we do not only use Quran and Hadith, because for example, we have to create a social network to maintain our people. So to make them, to protect them, to make more resilient, to make them more resilient on radical ideologies. And right now, maybe more than 10 years, I think, I personally handle the NU Online more than 13 years. So with more than 10 years, we have created many contents, maybe 1,000 content on jihad, on Khilafah, the special issues on jihad and Khilafah, and polygamy. Also, we have created many content. Some of our content have been published in books and also created videos. We have created many content. We have created dozens of websites, and right now maybe we encourage our people, our network, to create a YouTube channel, because YouTube becoming more popular than the website. Young generation, maybe they prefer to watch video than to read article. So this is very important, creating more content. And then also exploring platform, because this is very difficult actually to tackle extremism narrative, because sometimes they use maybe the secret platform. They can use Telegram. They even they can use chat feature in a game. Yeah. So this is very difficult. We can reach people with the website with SEO, search engine optimization, with a good article and good SEO. But we can reach all of the people. All of the people that have been organized by this radical group. We can enter their forum. We cannot enter their chat group. We cannot enter their Facebook group, because they set up the group closely or privately for their own members. So this is the challenge. And also we're organizing people and action, because creating content is not enough. We have created 1,000 content, but creating content is not enough. We have to organize the people, because I think if countering extremism, is that we need to mainstreaming the moderate perspective. We need to countering radical perspective. We have to also localizing the action of this group of radical group social. So this is like localizing in the area with social pressure. And yeah, we need the law enforcement of course, and security approach. So I think that creating more content is not enough, but that's what we are able to do, or what we are doing for more than 10 years. And to create content, based our experience, speed and reach matters. Maybe in the next slide. Speed and reach matter, because the online is about speed and reach. Maybe we can create a beautiful, important content, but if the content doesn't reach million people, so yeah, only a few people that read it or watch it. So speed and reach, and speed is about momentum. So if we can use the momentum to create a content directly, maybe in the same day, so we will reach many viewer, many reader in the website, in our article. And maybe for more than 10 years, we found that there is maybe there is a change in the landscape of the website. In the next slide. Maybe the first slide, in 2016, this is, I think, the first, this is the picture, the Islamic site popularity in 2016. In the top 3 Salafi website, the gray one, and the yellow one is this is a provocative website. The top 3 are the Salafi and the provocative or political Islamic website, and then our website, and you online, in number 4 in 2016. Number 4, and then after that, number 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 until the Salafi website and the radical website, the red one. The red one is the radical website that they're supporting the violent extremism. And the yellow one, this is like a provocative, political Islamic website. And the gray one, the Salafi website. And the green one, this moderate website. In 2016, only one moderate website, and that is NU Online, in the top 20 Islamic website. And then in 2018, there are 3 Islamic moderate websites, but still the yellow one, there are 5 the 5 provocative Islamic website. And this is also because of the Pilkada Jakarta, Ahok case, yeah. Ahok case, there are many Islamic provocative websites that are using the political issue to influence the people with religious, with Ahok case. And then in 2019, NU Online becoming the top Islamic website, but only NU Online. Below Salafi website and the provocative website. But there are 5 Islamic moderate websites in 2019. And all this is from our network. And then in 2020, January, actually, there are 6 Islamic moderate websites. And right now, in the end of October in the October, there are 7 Islamic moderate website in the top 20, all of them actually from our network. So this is there is a change in Islamic site popularity, maybe in the last 10 years. I think this is maybe that I can share with you about our experience in handling online radicalism in online space. Thank you, Prof. Kumar.
Thank you, Pak. Savic, for that very interesting presentation. I'm sure there will be a lot of interest in what you just shared. Now, I'd like to quickly pass the time over to Akil Yunus for the Malaysian perspective. Akil, over to you.
Thank you, Prof. Kumar. Very good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for having me today and for inviting me to speak. So let me just quickly share my screen. I hope everyone can see it. So I will be talking a little bit about countering online radicalization in the Malaysian context. And over the next 15 minutes or so, I will briefly touch on the following, which is maybe talk a little bit about the trends in online radicalization, and then looking at the multi-stakeholder approaches in countering violent extremism, especially in the online spaces. Touch a little bit on the challenges and opportunities, and also look at digital resilience as Prof. Kumar mentioned in my introduction earlier, how we view digital resilience as being a more lasting solution to counter online radicalization. So if I can just quickly look at the current trends, without going too much into the history, maybe focusing on the situation over the last 1.5 to 2 years since the COVID-19 pandemic. We know for a fact, and I think this is not just exclusive to Malaysia, COVID-19 did stagnate the physical activities of terrorist groups, and Malaysia was also one of these countries that maybe benefited, one of the silver linings, I guess, from the pandemic. In fact, the Royal Malaysian Police only reported about 7 terror-related arrests in 2020 compared to about 79 in 2019. And if I'm not mistaken, I think since 2013 or 2014, more than 500 individuals have been arrested, comprising Malaysians, foreign nationals, but arrested on Malaysian soil. So that's a large number of people. And although we don't have the exact figures, but I think like you could say more than 2/3 of them, the online appeal of or the online ideology factored very much into the process of radicalization that they went through. The lockdowns allowed terrorist organizations like Daesh, especially, to regroup and re-strategize. So this is why there is still, we cannot rest on our laurels in that sense. There is still a very real threat. In fact, the violent extremist rhetoric and propaganda still proliferates very widely online. And this has been kind of exacerbated by the fears, xenophobia, and disinformation campaigns arising from the pandemic. So the online radicalization process, and maybe some of you are familiar with the social conversion funnel that was introduced by Asia Foundation Rappler a couple of years ago, looking at how the process of online radicalization takes place. And this is probably similar with other parts of the region as well. You've got your open public media that everyone can access: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. And that's where people are initially exposed to content that is extremist in nature. And then once they've engaged with that content or expressed an interest, it moves on to the closed chat groups, such as WhatsApp, direct one-to-one engagements via Facebook Messenger. So imagine if you're commenting on, extremist content, somebody might very easily or could very easily message you and ask you, or to gauge your level of interest in pursuing, that kind of ideology further. And then it goes into encrypted communications before moving on to actual physical contact. So you can see that it's a gradual integration and sensitization to terrorist propaganda. And I would say, my opinion here is that, if we are to tackle this, the online terrorist narratives, we've got to probably do it at the open public media stages, or maybe even the closed chat groups. By the time it goes into encrypted communications or physical contact, it becomes very difficult to track and monitor these individuals, especially those who self-radicalize online. So some of the appealing narratives, and we are no stranger to some of these narratives that proliferate widely online. The victimization narrative, how terrorists portray ourselves as victims of aggression, and that we need to stand up for it. Whether it can be from a religious perspective, the Muslim population is under threat or being attacked, so to speak, and that we need to stand up for it. Of course, there's a religious reward angle, that God has promised you, many rewards in the afterlife if you fight for their cause. The duty to fight injustice, and I think this stacks very closely to the narratives of the solidarity with the Middle Eastern conflicts and things like that, and how it is incumbent upon all Muslims to fight this injustice. A sense of belonging and also heroism and adventure. I think these last two actually can be a very kind of strong pull for a lot of people who are just seeking a lot of thrill and adventure. And to be frank, if you look at the terrorist propaganda, the images and videos that they use are of top-notch quality and very captivating to audiences. So it's you could very easily be enticed by it. And especially when the language that they use, the way they phrase their narratives, it almost challenges those who view this content or their followers to prove their courage, to prove their bravery. And for those who feel that they have something to prove, it can be a very alluring prospect to either travel abroad to join or to become a supporter of these causes. So moving on to what we are doing, or what Malaysia is currently doing in terms of countering the online narratives of other extremist groups and also countering online radicalization. So I won't go too much into the more hard approaches. We've got law enforcement, we've got legislation. In Malaysia, we have the Communications and Multimedia Act that also deals with extremist content online or hateful content, and they act as a kind of de facto regulatory body. We've also got the de-radicalization and reintegration programs in Malaysia that are carried out by the police, the prisons, and the Home Affairs Ministry. But I'd like to maybe zero in a bit on what an organization like mine, Siasat, focuses on, which is the soft approaches. So I am part of the Digital Strategic Communications Division at Siasat that was established in 2016 to monitor online terrorist messaging and to develop counter alternative narratives in the form of digital content and products. And we also work to promote PCVE initiatives offline, such as organizing workshops, seminars, and capacity building programs to raise awareness on the dangers of VE propaganda, a lot of it which is online. Siasat also collaborates with local and international partners on PCV programming. So we work with a range of international organizations, whether it's at the ASEAN or even the UN level. Being part of the Foreign Affairs Ministry, that is one of our key engagement areas in that sense. So I would like to highlight exactly how we are fighting online narratives. So we are part of the Strategic Communications Unit at Siasat, where the idea is to create and disseminate alternative messaging or counter narratives on PCVE without making it look like it's something that is coming from a government agency, because there can be a big trust deficit, a lot of issues when something is framed as being government propaganda. So couple of years ago, the Digital Strategic Communications Division came up with the social media brand known as My Aman, which in English literally translates to My Peace, which is a dedicated social media brand to develop and disseminate alternative messaging and counter narratives on PCVE. And that is done through the production of digital content on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. So we have a few platforms, you know, where the violent extremist groups most regularly operate, I guess. And some of these examples of products that we have launched in the past couple of years include digital comics, short videos, images, and PSAs. The one that you see in the screenshot here is actually a series of comics called Savic. Savic is actually an acronym for Countering Ideologies of Violent Extremism Through Technology, through Comics and Technology. So this is actually a series of, you know, standalone comics that actually, you know, Siasat worked with illustrators and comic artists to come up with these comics, and they are actually standalone stories, but they contain very subtle messaging to discourage people or to raise awareness on the dangers of violent extremism online and violent extremist ideology. So My Aman to date, I would say, is one of Siasat's main vehicles to promote counter narratives in the most subtle way possible. And then we look at the role of youth. You know, I think it goes without saying that the youth are today's digital generation, and of course, most susceptible to online radicalization. Terrorists, in fact, are very well known to exploit the vacuum created by unfulfilled expectations of youth, providing them with a utopian alternative. As I mentioned earlier, some of the narratives that come out of, or some of the narratives that are more successful, you know, successfully proliferated by violent extremist groups is the heroism and adventure, the sense of belonging, and the fact that, you know, you are well taken care of if you become a follower of a extremist organization. And this is where the unfulfilled expectations come in. A lot of youth today can be very easily disillusioned by the political processes in their country or disenfranchised. And when they are provided with a utopian alternative or a so-called utopian alternative, it's very easy to be drawn to it. So some of the solutions that Malaysia has explored is in terms of providing peer-to-peer support in preventing the spread of violent extremist ideologies online, to encourage youth participation in crafting strategies and policies that directly mitigate the drivers of violent extremism, and also to provide them with alternative outlets to channel grievances. And this is very important because a lot of youth today feel like they lack the platforms to have their voices heard. And this is why it is incumbent upon society in general to provide them with outlets where they can more positively channel whatever frustrations or grievances that they might have without resorting to violence. So some of the state and non-state initiatives, like I mentioned earlier, awareness workshops, digital competitions. There have even been guidebooks for youth on detecting signs of radicalization that have been published by non-state organizations as well as the state. And also looking at PVE, preventing violent extremism through education. So without going into too much detail, these are some of the programs that Siasat has done, but there are so many others out there. You know, Siasat has engaged the youth very regularly. In fact, I would say that they are one of the main target audiences for Siasat in terms of our engagement. We have done a lot of workshops with them, encourage them to come up with their own content. So if you look at some of these workshops, you know, it is manifest in the form of competitions to promote social cohesion as a means of addressing violent extremism, to come up with digital content or their own narratives that directly counter the narratives of terrorist groups. So this was a publication on the left. It was publication by Siasat not too long ago on acting as a peer-to-peer resource guide on ensuring that your kawan, which is friend, never becomes a terrorist. And then you also have a couple of guidebooks and guidelines to prevent youth radicalization that were published as a collaboration between the Youth and Sports Ministry in Malaysia, as well as youth NGOs like the Angkatan Belia Islam Malaysia or the Malaysia Islamic Youth Movement. Role of families and communities. Personally, I think this is one of the most important areas to focus on. Families and communities represent the first line of defense in detecting early signs of radicalization and also to intervene before the situation worsens. Families and communities also represent a more credible voice in counter-messaging initiatives. As I mentioned earlier, being a government agency, we are very cognizant of the fact that a lot of the messaging that comes or seem to come directly from government can be misperceived or can be seen as state-sanctioned propaganda, and that doesn't necessarily work in our favor, which is why Siasat's engagement with civil society organizations and community-based actors is very important to increase the number of credible actors that are working on counter-messaging efforts. There's also rehabilitation and reintegration. I think especially in terms of reintegration, communities and CSOs play a very important role when those who have been detained or returning foreign fighters wish to reintegrate back into society. One of the key avenues or one of the key areas for them is to get the support from their families and members of their community, so that there is so they do not reoffend or go back to their old ways. CSOs and community-based actors also help address the structural drivers and grievances that lead to radicalization. So we know for a fact that CSOs work on areas like human rights, like upholding the rule of law, youth empowerment, women empowerment, and all of those areas directly, champion the issues that if not addressed, can become grievances that lead to radicalization, which is why CSOs and community-based actors, the work that they're doing is very important. And of course, finally, in building social cohesion and safe spaces online and offline as well, CSOs and community actors are very important in that regard. So talking about first line of defense and early intervention, Siasat is actually working with UNODC and the Royal Malaysian Police to establish an early warning, early response mechanism that will involve these actors proactively. And the purpose of it is to develop a guideline manual of pre-radicalization and radicalization indicators, as well as to train community-based actors and civil society organizations to detect at-risk individuals and also to conduct early intervention programs. What we've noticed based on research and based on our engagement with the police, for instance, is that a lot of monitoring can take place before a person actually exhibits signs of violence or that they are planning an attack or something like that. But unfortunately, the police are unable to intervene until and unless a person has actually committed an offense. And this is where the early warning, early response initiative becomes crucial. If we can detect the early warning signs and detect at-risk individuals before they've actually resorted to violence or plan to travel abroad, we can bring them out of this before they have to end up in prison, for instance. And this is something that is currently in the works to develop in a sort of intervention group comprising academicians, civil society actors that can look at early intervention. Some of the challenges and opportunities that still exist, and I think many of us working in the area of PCVE or counterterrorism know this, is that it's very difficult, of course, to monitor and evaluate success. A lot of initiatives that even Siasat has conducted, it remains to be seen, or sometimes we are not entirely certain how successful they have been. Our target, whether it's actually targeting the very people that we wish to target, these at-risk individuals themselves. And this is why it's important to actually have more capacity building and effective monitoring and evaluation indicators for every program that is conducted, and also have tailored and targeted initiatives for different demographics, whether it's the youth, whether it's women, whether it's male, female, how men and women might be radicalized differently. This is how we need to maybe focus more on tailored and targeted initiatives, which is probably not being done enough at the moment. And to bridge trust deficits, the credibility and relatability of counter-messaging efforts is very important. As I mentioned earlier, it can be very easy for those who we are targeting with our messaging to be distrustful of the content that is coming out of it. And that's something that we need to be cognizant about. To enhance government CSO cooperation in Malaysia and probably maybe in other parts of the world or the region as well, it's not always easy to foster effective government CSO cooperation. And that's something that Siasat is also looking to bridge at the moment, enhancing engagement with CSOs. I think something that we also really need to be looking at going forward is the growing threat of racially and ethnically motivated violent extremism, not just focusing on groups like ISIS and Daesh, but as a result of the pandemic, there has been a stark increase in xenophobic and hateful sentiments online. And we can see, as a matter of fact, the discrimination and stigmatization of certain communities. I think, the key ones being undocumented migrants, refugees, and people who are deemed at fault for spreading the coronavirus. And these people have been greatly marginalized as a result. And there's even been death threats, threats of violence against these communities. And that's something that moving forward, we've got to address, because all of it predominantly is taking place online, these sentiments, these narratives. Which is why it brings me to kind of summarize my presentation today to the need for digital resilience as a lasting solution to violent extremism, to online radicalization. What is digital resilience? It really just is about how we govern our usage of the internet and how we conduct ourselves online. The risk and responsibilities that are associated with one's online presence. Digitally resilient individuals are able to actively initiate ways to mitigate this risk and recover from them. They would know who and when and whom to turn to for support, to learn from their own and others' experiences, to create a safe space online, and also to think critically as well as appreciate, respect, and understand the different perspectives that take place online, to respect one another's views, for example, whether it's political differences or ideological differences. I think that's one of the places where we start to really encourage people to respect that difference, so that it reduces the prospect of radicalization. So in terms of strengthening digital resilience, what are some of the potential outcomes of digital resilience against violent extremism in particular? It would allow people to know when and how to flag or report extremist content. It will also, and this term has been used by presenters before me as well, echo chambers. It will really help avoid echo chambers online. Help people fact check, because one of the biggest contributors to online radicalization can be disinformation, deviant teachings, or even fake news that can kind of snowball into something a lot bigger. Fact-checking ability is very important. Also, in terms of thwarting terrorist recruitment and funding networks online, by being digitally resilient, we do not fall so easily for, messaging that tells you, for example, to contribute to, in terms of financial contribution to certain organizations without knowing, what they stand for or where they're affiliated to. And also, finally, in terms of fostering empathy and mutual respect, as I mentioned, empathy is very important. If we can actually just be a little bit more empathetic towards each other online, it will be one of the first steps in discouraging online radicalization and dispelling the threat. Siasat's dedicated Facebook page on counter narratives is actually producing content on digital resilience. So this presentation, I guess, is timely in that sense as well. But I just like to end with a poster that we've actually prepared for this Digital Resilience Week on our Facebook presence. With that, I thank you, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Akil, for that excellent presentation. Very rich analysis, presentation of what colleagues in Malaysia are doing in the online space. So thanks very much. I'm sure there'll be questions for you as well. Pass the time now to Amina Rasul-Bernardo for the Philippine perspective.
Thank you, Professor Kumar, for the invitation to participate in this discussion of a very critical issue, that of online radicalization. Could I have the slide, please? Thank you. Today, we not only worry about the external links and the threat of violent extremism, we also have to worry about homegrown extremism. And we only have to turn on the TV and watch the development of domestic terrorism and extremism in the United States to appreciate how crucial it is to deal with this problem. Next, please. But sometimes I get discouraged because the United States is way ahead of us in terms of what discussed earlier, digital resilience. So our problems are great indeed. Let me first congratulate Maria Ressa for the rare honor of having been selected as a Nobel Peace Prize awardee for 2021. I mentioned Maria here because she has been a valuable resource person for the Philippine Center for Islam and Democracy on online radicalization and violent extremism. Maria has been warning us of the manipulation of social media by extremists, violent or otherwise, for years now. Her online paper, her online news portal, Rappler, released a report last April 2020 based on the Pew Research Center survey. And the report noted that the Philippines has the fourth highest differential when it comes to internet usage by age. 94% of the 18 to 29 Filipinos use the internet at least occasionally or own a smartphone. For the 50 plus Filipinos, the seniors, the number is 36%, which makes for a percentage differential of 58. Indonesia has the highest, according to the Pew survey, with a 65-point disparity. Next, please. Now, do you remember the Marawi Siege, which took place from May 23 to October 17 of 2017? The ISIS-affiliated Maute group and the Abu Sayyaf group controlled Marawi for 3 months, following a gunfight with the Philippine Army and the National Police. Some of the ISIS-linked fighters traveled from abroad, including from Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Middle East. Their presence raised concerns that the Philippines could become an ISIS hub. ISIS had funneled tens of thousands of dollars from Syria to militants in the Philippines as early as January of 2017, according to some sources. President Duterte finally declared Marawi liberated on October 17, but casualties were high, over 1,000 fighters and civilians dead, and at least 400,000 residents of Marawi City and nearby towns displaced. ISIS has used a video footage of the battle as a recruiting tool. Next, please. Maria Ressa's analysis, in part, led us to do some research on the situation in Marawi after the siege. In partnership with Chemonics, an international consultancy group, we commissioned the Social Weather Stations, which is the leading polling institution in the Philippines, to conduct a survey. We worked with SWS on the questionnaire and the areas to be surveyed, deciding on provinces in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, Maguindanao, Lanao del Sur, Marawi City, and the IDP camps in Marawi, the internally displaced persons camp. The IDP camps in particular were of tremendous interest, as the victims of the siege are very ripe for radicalization and recruitment if their needs are not addressed. A little bit of the survey respondents. 70 to 88% of the respondents had studied in a madrasa. And 80% of those in the IDP camp said that they had had some schooling in the madrasa. 12 to 41% had little or no formal secular education. So you have a lot of people with zero literacy. 20 to 59% watch TV at least a few days a week. And interestingly, 36% of those in the IDP camps said that they did get to watch television a few days a week. As far as reading newspapers, well, it seems that it's only in Maguindanao where they actually read newspapers to get their information, and only 2% at that said that they read newspapers. Next, please. I'll share with you a couple of slides that I think will be of particular interest to us. First is the internet use and social media use for political purposes. Note that in the IDP camps, where majority have lost their incomes and possessions, still you have 36% who said they access the internet. And of this, 33% liked or promoted materials related to political or social issues that others have posted. 17% said that they posted their own thoughts or comments on political or social issues. Now, if I were with the government working on prevention or countering violent extremism, this is somewhat of a red flag. Because if you are in a camp where you have to be given food because you've lost your income, but whatever money you have, you can still use it for accessing social media in order to find out what's happening in the field of politics. And I can only assume this includes looking at what's happening in Afghanistan and Syria and others, then there is much to worry about. Next, please. The other slide that I wanted to share with you is statistics on who do the Muslims of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region trust. And you can see here, overwhelmingly, it's the religious leaders, the imams and the alims. So if you're looking at this, the ranking, the percentages raised from 77 to 90 to a very high number of 90%. If we are to combat radicalization face-to-face or online, it is obvious that we have to involve the most trusted in the community, and that's the Muslim religious leaders, both to develop the messaging, as Savic Ali is doing in Indonesia, and to disseminate the messages themselves. Unfortunately, this has not really been done in my country, even though the Philippines has a national commission for Muslim Filipinos with offices in all regions. Next, please. So what are we doing? Civil society and academe, as is true in Indonesia, Malaysia, and other countries, are very active in conducting workshops and training for peace building. Academe is engaged in doing its own research on radicalization, but largely these efforts are funded by development partners or multilateral organizations like the UN, and not so much by government. So that by itself is already one problem. When we look at what government is doing, the Philippines approved its National Action Plan on Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism in 2019. And PCVE training for security forces, national government, civil servants, local governments, NGOs, and private sector partners have been identified and supported. Government has been relying on counterinsurgency programs to encourage defections from the Abu Sayyaf, the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters, and the Maute group, and to rehabilitate former fighters, as well as supporting conflict resolution and peace-building programs. the best funded of these conflict resolution and peace building programs is called PAMANA. That's a Tagalog term to mean legacy or inheritance, which is a funding program for projects and capacity building managed by the Office of the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process. The Philippine government has also supported communication efforts to counter terrorist messaging. But unfortunately, the programs have not really been that effective. A new Anti-Terrorism Act was passed in 2020, expanding the legal definition of terrorism and carrying a punishment of up to 12 years in prison. Punishable acts include the usual violent acts, property damages, and attacks on infrastructure, but now extends terrorism to include speeches, writings, proclamations, emblems, banners, and other representations purportedly to cover radicalization and recruitment, such as online radicalization. Critics say, however, that it is intended to intimidate the general public, activism, or general protests, and violates human rights such as freedom of speech. The Anti-Terrorism Act created or strengthened the Anti-Terrorism Council, which is chaired by the Executive Secretary with the National Security Advisor as the Vice Chairman. Its members include the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, the Secretary of National Defense, the Secretary of the Interior and Local Government, the Secretary of Finance for financing of extremism. It includes the Secretary of Information and Communication Technology. And that's the one department that one would think should be key to a strategy to counter online radicalization and recruitment. But based on my discussion with some of the officials within the ICT, it is unfortunate that the funding that they have is really minuscule. And it doesn't seem like there is a robust program within the ICT for this serious issue. Next, please. So what do we do? I agree with the previous speakers that we have to look at research, survey, and analysis. I'm happy to hear about the research and analysis that have been done in Indonesia and Malaysia. And I believe that such research and analysis could also yield positive results in the Philippines. The survey that we did, for instance, with Chemonics and the SWS zeroes in on possible target sectors and communities. And if we are to develop a communication program or a conflict resolution program or a CPVE program, we need to be more specific in our targeting. Otherwise, it is money lost. And then let's take a look at messaging. The two slides that I shared with you that showed how internet is accessed even by those suffering within the IDP communities, and the slide showing who is the most trusted in the communities are very clear indicators of who should be involved when you're trying to develop a message or counter the extremist narratives that's available online. And if we are to design a dissemination mechanism, these are the very same people who will have access to our target sectors. So if I were in the Anti-Terrorism Council and trying to develop an effective strategy to counter radicalization, the first thing that I would do would be to make sure that I engage, capacitate the religious scholars and the Muslim religious leaders, as well you would bring in the young technology experts, because they're the ones who swim social media, who know the ins and outs of social media. As well, bring in the communications expert, those who are very good in advertising. What I would like to advise my government, for instance, is perhaps we should learn from the trolls. The Philippines has become known, I understand, internationally as quite a vocal group of online trolls. And if they're able to do this, to attack somebody who disrespects their favorite K-pop or their favorite Filipino food, somebody within government can most certainly take a look at the mechanisms of the troll vehicles and see how they can be best adapted for use to counter online radicalization. I would say let's call them elves, and let the elves counter the trolls. And third, and I think this is even more crucial, government agencies who are engaged, who are responsible for the prevention and countering of violent extremism, offline or online, really need to have better coordination and preparation. Because if we are to look at the track record of our government agencies, they have been good at designating which are the terrorist organizations. They have developed policies, they have passed laws, but when it comes to implementation at the ground level, you do not feel the effect of their programs for countering and prevention of violent extremism. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for giving me this chance to share with you, and looking forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amina, and thanks to all three speakers again for that excellent series of presentations. I can already see the questions coming in. Maybe perhaps to kick off, to sort of like get the ball rolling. You know, when the three speakers, all of you touched on the importance of trust. Trust in terms of the online space, right? In order for the message to get across, the trust of the audience is very important. So, and it seems to be it's quite interesting because Amina, you mentioned that in the Philippines context, certainly when you look at a report you mentioned for the IDPs, the role of the Muslim scholars, the imams, very highly trusted, right? Yes. So the question I have for, perhaps colleagues, Pak Savic and Akil, is this the same in Indonesia? Are the moderate Muslim scholars the most trusted group for your work as well? Or which are the most trusted groups in terms of most effective counter-narrative in your countries? So perhaps I can ask Pak Savic, then Akil.
Yeah, I think yes, but every group, they has their own imam. They has their own ustad. For example, in Indonesia, there are two, the big Muslim organization, the NU and Muhammadiyah. So, yeah, NU people follow NU Ustad, follow NU Imam, and Muhammadiyah also follow Muhammadiyah Imam, Muhammadiyah Ustad. And also the Salafist group, they only follow the Salafi Ustad. And the radical group also, they only follow their own preacher, their own Ustad. The radical group, they don't follow and you start. So this is the
Sure. Thank you. Akil, what's your view?
Thanks, Prof. Kumar. I think it would be very similar, I would say, even in Malaysia, a very similar trend in the sense that everyone has got very different, a very different, personality or figure that they would follow. We've got, of course, the official, state-sanctioned Islam is the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, right? They say, which is the Sunni brand of Islam. But under that, you've got a range of different religious personalities who have teachings that don't necessarily are not necessarily the same. You've got some of the more firebrand religious preachers in that sense that actually garner a very big following. Whether they are radical or whether they encourage towards some kind of violent radicalization, I would say that there's no hard evidence of that. But the difference is that, or the situation here rather, is that people do not follow one certain branch or one certain brand of religious preacher in that sense. Of course, on the on the government side, what we try to encourage, and even when it comes to the rehabilitation side of things, how we rehabilitate violent extremist detainees, we do look at more those who espouse more moderate beliefs. Of course, you've got one or two maybe who can be a little bit controversial in that sense, but they are probably effective at swaying people away from some of these more popular violent extremist narratives or ideologies. It is very difficult to pinpoint a small group of people that are reliable or trusted, because everybody trusts very different organizations. And like Pak Savic said, I think those who are radical or those who are actually cross that boundary into violent radicalization do not follow any of these. Even if they are firebrand, even if they are a little controversial, they are on a different plane altogether already. That's my humble opinion. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Amina. What do you think?
Yes. Well, if I may, we are not looking at which sect, which group is the most trusted. The survey result is pretty generic. Any imam, any Muslim, because the imam in your community, if you're Shia, the Shia imam. If you're Sunni, the Sunni imam. But the point is, when you go down to the community level, their local religious leader is the one that they trust most, ahead of anybody from government. And if that is the situation, if you have a high of 90% of the respondents saying that they trust their religious leader, and you are developing a program, a strategy to counter or prevent violent extremism, we're not talking about doing something with those who have already been radicalized. We're talking about countering or preventing. Then who are you going to partner with? Are you going to partner with the police? Are you going to partner with the mayor? No. The first person that you have to bring on board is the one they trust most, and that's the religious leader. And why? Because they know the narrative and they can provide you the content for your messaging. They don't know how to make it sexy. That's where the young techies, the young digitally resilient people come in, and that's where the advertising people come in. But for the content, the people that you need to engage and bring on board are the religious scholars and the religious leaders. And when you're looking at where they are in the community, they are the ones who control the masjid and the madrasa, which could be principal recruitment areas. So again, you need to be able to engage these people in any strategy to prevent or to counter violent extremism. There must be a working strategy. I understand from friends in Indonesia that there are good programs going on engaging religious scholars. There's even one that engages women who teach in the madrasa. We in the Philippines, my own organization, for instance, have worked for more than 10 years doing capacity building for women who teach in the madrasa, and they have, through our help, organized themselves into their own network called Nurus-Salam, or Light of Peace. And what we do is to partner with institutions like the Commission on Human Rights to develop human rights modules with an Islamic frame so that these women can now combine their learning in Islamic theology with learning in human rights and be able to now use it when they teach in the madrasa.
Thank you very much. Great responses. I have another question, but I think I can save it because quite a few questions have come in. A very relevant question actually here. You know that the Taliban has come back to power in Afghanistan. So in your online space, in the three countries, do you see an impact of this in your online space in terms of the reaction to the Taliban's return to power? Maybe Savic, you want to go first?
I only see maybe a little bit influence on when Taliban came into power in Afghanistan in online space. We have been monitoring the conversation in Twitter, maybe over a year, and also in Facebook. But Facebook is quite difficult. But I only see maybe a little bit support for the Taliban in Indonesian online space, even in Twitter, in Facebook, or in YouTube, or in Instagram.
Sure. Thank you. Akil?
Thanks, Prof. Kumar. Yeah. So I would tend to say that it is still early days in terms of gauging exactly how the global population feels about Taliban coming back to power. The initial reaction has been in Malaysia. For instance, in Malaysia, there's no denying that there is actually some a certain demographics rather, where there is some tacit sympathy maybe for because we have to remember that Taliban is unlike the more violent extremist groups like Daesh or Al-Qaeda. People tend to differentiate them, at least those who sympathize with them, find ways to differentiate them from the more extreme, if that's even possible. But at the same time, I think we need to realize that Taliban's role itself in providing the kind of environment for these terrorist groups to fester and to grow is problematic. And even though there is sympathy in the sense that because those who maybe espouse more fundamental religious teachings or very the more extreme religious but non-violent Islamic teachings would probably sympathize with the Taliban more than they would with Daesh or Al-Qaeda and things like that. I cannot say for certain the level of conversation here, except to say that there is sympathy, and I guess on Malaysia's side, this is why we're taking a very cautious approach to even recognizing the Taliban in the first place. At some point, that will have to be decided, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you, Amina.
It's early days to really get a feel for the extent that the fall of Afghanistan has, the impact that it has on our Muslim communities in the Philippines. But let me just say that within, for instance, my own Facebook group, I have already seen a hardening of messages. At one point, when I put out a post stating that I worried about the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan with the entry of the Taliban, I actually had several responding that essentially the Taliban is in the right. There's nothing to fear from them. They are doing God's work. They're following Islam. And essentially, they're very supportive of Taliban. Now imagine in an area like us in Muslim Mindanao, where we are trying to defend the democratic space that we have gained, especially for women and girls. Imagine the messaging that comes from the Taliban as it curtails the democratic space for women and girls, and the impact it has to those who already are veering that way. I worry about the expansion of the influence of the Taliban. And as you very well know, there is a relationship between the hardening of fundamentalist thought the closing of democratic space, and an increase in radicalization. So at this particular point, we have to start looking at how the Taliban's victory affects us and what we are going to do about it.
Sure, thank you. All right, I'll move on. There's a dog somewhere in South Asia who wants to get in on the presentation as well for some reason. I might forget about that. Just try and ignore him, the dog, right? So dog's not FP. So what is the general profile of youth, right? You guys mentioned the role of youth, right? These extremist organizations are trying to attract youth. So in your countries, what is the background of the youth? I mean, where are they from? The most vulnerable youth in your countries. Yeah, maybe Pak Savic.
Yeah, maybe there is a situation that the most vulnerable youth to radical perspective, radical ideology, or maybe the ultra-conservative ideologies. In Indonesia, this is interesting because the young urban Muslim, they more maybe interested in ultra-conservative perspective, Salafist perspective, than the young in a rural area. For example, in Indonesia, in Jakarta and in Bandung, and in Surabaya maybe in some extent, but in Jakarta and in Surabaya, there is a movement that called Hijrah movement. This is like Hijrah. Most of their followers or their members coming from the urban area. The young, the middle class, they educated in high university and coming from the big university like Universitas Indonesia, ITB, IPB. So this is quite interesting that many young urban generation, they're very, very interested in Salafist perspective. They're wearing chadar, they're wearing the short like the special jeans, yeah, for them, yeah, and they do not wear jeans like us. But in the rural area, we find maybe only little young generation that follow the Hijrah movement. But based on research, I think, and on how many people, young people that involved in bombing attack, so most of them coming from rural area, right, not from urban area.
Thank you. Akil, what about you?
I would say, okay, the youth profile in Malaysia, I think previously what we used to see was a trend that, you know, poverty, lack of education even corresponded to a higher likelihood of people getting radicalized online. But today that is no longer the case. I feel like Savic mentioned also, it's actually those with a higher level of education. You know, those based on interviews that we have done on some of the projects, you know, interviewing current prison detainees, right? Those who've been detained for extremist activities. Some of them were you know, one or two of them were studying to be doctors, for example, but they still found themselves susceptible. And you know, when you ask them questions like whether they are happy to give up their career aspirations or their studies, and they say yes, you know, I'm more than ready to. And that was interesting because previously you would think that it's those who, in fact, it's actually those who lack religious grounding more so that are more susceptible. So education in terms of general education doesn't really, you know, there's no one trend or the other, but it's those who actually lack religious grounding, which is why I would say that compared to the rural areas where maybe there is more religious grounding, you know, there's a greater emphasis maybe on religious education. You know, the interpretation of scripture is maybe a lot more accurate, whereas those in urban areas, you know, are more easily influenced by what they see online, and that can be distorted and you know, made deviant in so many different ways. You know, whether it's Quranic interpretations or anything like that. So that's that's how I would say that the trend is kind of playing out in Malaysia. But one other thing that we've also noticed is that the tendency for radicalization has corresponded to a cultural shift as well, in terms of what they like to call the Arabization of young, Muslim youth nowadays. So the resorting to wearing Arab clothing, for example, or the way dressing the way Arabs dress. Those people have also exhibited, greater interest in some of these conservative ideals or conservative ideologies. So I feel that it has corresponded to the cultural shift as well. That's just my 2 cents on this. Yeah.
Thank you. Interesting insights. Amina, what is your view on the youth background?
Well, in the Philippines, because the areas where you have the bombings and instances of armed conflict in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, that's also the region that's the least served, where you have the poorest of the poor, where access to education is low, where adult illiteracy is high. So if you are looking at the predisposition of the young towards violent extremist thought, I would say that it's really there. Consider the fact that in these areas you have the more I'm not even that worried about the fundamentalist religious leaders, but I'm really worried about the radicalized religious leaders, those who are affiliated with the BIFF or the Abu Sayyaf or the ISIS, the other ISIS affiliated groups. They are in the community all the time. And you have young people who are not employed, who are not going to school, who are just wasting their time. Then it is very easy to get these young people to start following your own particular brand of Islam and luring them into the path of violent extremism, because as we very well know, those who do the recruitment for violent extremist groups will not let go of somebody that they find to be very ripe for indoctrination. But again, unfortunately, my region, the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, does not really have a very robust program for prevention and countering violent extremism. There are so many workshops, so many trainings going on, so many little projects all over the place. But I have yet to see something that is systemic, strategic, and therefore effective.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe a couple now of a more focused questions for some of you. So Pak Savic, the question on the role of the Republica news portal in encountering online radicalism. Do you think it's effective, I suppose, in countering online radicalism? And also, I think it's a very relevant question. We noticed that in your presentation, right, especially in 2020, NU Online and Islamic.co have become very popular. I mean, that's great, but so
popular for Muslim.
Oh, for Muslims, yes.
Yeah, popular for Muslim readers.
For Muslim readers, yes. But that's great. That's great. But any comment on the Republica? Do you think? Do you have any view on this?
Yeah. About the countering online, I think there are the two key for us in countering the online narrative. The first is message or content, and the two is messenger. This is very important. Religious region is messenger, and the website is messenger. But the content and the message. When we talk about the content or the message, we need to have the strong argument. We have to provide all the argument that we need to beat the radical argument. So we have to quote hadith, we have to quote Quran, for example. Why I create Islamic.co? Because NU Online is also not sufficient to influence the young generation, especially the urban Muslim, because most of the urban Muslim maybe they do not affiliate, their family do not affiliated to NU. NU more traditional organization that most of their member maybe they live in the villages. So I create the Islami.co because I see that NU Online as a messenger, as a website, as an institution, we do not able to reach the young urban Muslim. So I have to create another one that may be more close to them, and with the different content, with different style of writing, with different style of the videos, of picture, or something like that. Because this is very important about the message, about the design, about the videos, about the source, the message. And in the online, the message also that we need a quantity, not only a good content. Quantity is very, very important in the online space. How much number the article that you can create every week, every month, every year. Because this is, we have to follow the Google algorithm. If we only write, for example, maybe 10, 20, or only 100 articles, Google, they will do not put our article on the first page of Google search. We have to create 1,000 related articles if we want to put our article on the first page. So this is the long journey, I think. So this is about search engine optimization. Maybe there is a shortcut to them, but maybe after 1 month or 2 months, maybe your article will disappear on Google search. But the messenger also. So we create many websites. One, maybe some website with NU flag in our website. But some of the website, maybe if the common people, the Muslim people, they read on the website, they do not aware that website run by young NU generation. For example, in the last Ramadan, one of the Salafis, I mean with Salafi is ultra-conservative group. They do not support violence, but ultra-conservative group. And there's still a problem on maybe women issues, on democracy. So, for example, in the last Ramadan, one of the Salafis affiliated Instagram, they recommended our website, Islami.co, to read by their members, because maybe they don't know that this website run by NU young generation. They will never recommend NU Online, for example. So this is important about the message, about the messenger, not only quantity or argument, but not only quality, but also quantity, also the number.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a very important point, which is very insightful. I think, I mean, there have been a number of questions, but I think it's a good time to sort of like wind this up. Apologies if I couldn't go to everything, because there's so many questions, because the presentations have been very insightful, but it's very important to also touch a bit on digital resilience, how to build resilience against these extremist ideas. So, for example, there's this question about, Ms. Amina was talking about we need to have elves to fight against the trolls, right? But because action tend to generate reaction, how to build, civil online discourse, which is part of digital resilience? I mean, what do you think? I mean, Pak Savic, maybe you've talked already. Maybe Amina first, then Akil, then Pak Savic. Yes. To wrap up.
Thank you. Thank you, Kumar. That's why I'm really focusing on how government can react. I think we're spending a lot of funding on programs that we can see or count. The number of training workshops, the number of people who have come to our workshops, the number of madrasas that we have built, because the content is invisible and cannot be counted. And yet that is where governments must spend its resources, which is why I came up with that idea. I mean, if you've got trolls who are very effective at manipulating your perspective and bringing you into the rabbit hole, for instance, why can government or the multilateral organizations, for that matter, take a look at something to counter this? Look at the strategies that's being used by trolls, for instance, and use it to neutralize messages that start to come out, flooding the internet space, and radicalizing our young. The other thing that we could do, those of us who are in civic spaces, is really to look at the influencers, especially among women. Why can we not have young, attractive scholars who can have online portals and have a discourse with young people who have so many questions to ask, but who may be a little bit wary of approaching the more senior, established ulama and imams? And I still have to see somebody of that caliber online who comes from a younger generation and who would have a more progressive interpretation of Islam. And lastly, if I may make a plug, we at the Philippine Center for Islam and Democracy, as our share in trying to neutralize radicalization and the growth of fundamentalism, we have launched a podcast called She Talks Peace. It's available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and perhaps little initiatives like this can help us to defend the space that we have gained for democracy, for progress, for pluralism. Thank you.
Thank you. Akil, final word from you?
Yeah, just very quickly. I think, the issue of trolls is precisely why it is very crucial, to have credible messengers in this field. Let's face it, at the end of the day, trolls are not the credible messengers, but what they do very well is that they are able to spark or ignite people online, and I mean, trolls live for that purpose, I guess, which is why I feel, that and this is something that we are already working on as well, investing the need for government to invest time, resources, as well as finances into looking at credible messengers online. And sometimes it might even require these credible messengers to in other words, sink to the level of trolls, but to use the very content that is used by trolls against them. If I can make an example, when it comes to countering the narratives of terrorist groups, for example, right, how they portray very captivating videos, recorded with GoPros and like super heroic, and it's like you're watching a feature film. And then what some of the workshops that we had, some of the youths, what they did was to troll that video, by using a comedy sketch or something and showing like reality versus expectation. Reality is that you'll go there, by expectation is that you end up killing your own friends, you end up bombing your own self. Those kind of things, like in a way trolling back, to negate the narratives put out by these trolls. So I think that's something that really needs to be looked into further. Yep.
Appreciate that. Thanks very much, Akil, for very, very sharp comment on that. Yes. Final word to Pak Savic.
Yeah, thank you. I see that internet is like a huge river of ideas, of ideology, of information. So to make sure that our huge river is still being positive, we have to make sure that we have to flood the internet with moderate water, moderate content. This is like a huge river, but radical movement is actually depend on many things. Depend on political situation, international geopolitics. So this is the countering them on online space is not enough, but because maybe much more young generation, millennial generation that going online. So this is becoming more and more important.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, unfortunately, we are run out of time. There have been so many questions. but we've had such a rich discussion, and what we have been able to take away in terms of the importance of the message, in terms of the trust between the messenger and the audience, in terms of the mechanisms for disseminating the useful counter-narratives are all very useful. So this kind of topic, we could probably keep going for another 2 hours or so, but we can't because our speakers have to deal with the other responsibilities. So we would like to thank our 3 speakers, Amina, Savic, Akil, for taking their time, precious time from their very busy schedules to share with us the very useful insights. Thanks very much for that. Before you go, colleagues, appreciate it if you could take a few minutes to complete the feedback form, which will be accessible via QR code on your screens immediately after the session. Also, please note that ICPVTR has just launched a Southeast Asian Militant Atlas, which may be of use to analysts working on Southeast Asian terrorism issues. So we hope to keep you engaged with us in this space. So please look out for our next webinar. And with that, thank you very much, colleagues. And again, once our distinguished speakers, thank you very much. Hope to see you in person soon. Thank you.